Good evening. Good evening. You have found yourself again at the Community Beit Midrash.
So
and
if
this
you didn't
evening,
intend to be here, here's your chance to escape.
yeah, just bow out. We are tonight covering again the topic of, ways that different observations, the way Jews observe holidays differently depending on denominations. 2 previous sessions have covered this, and there were a lot of great discussions about like liturgy and congregational life. And tonight, I thought it would be more fun to talk more about like home practices and bring it a little bit more personal. So I'll start by saying hello. If you've never met me, I'm Jenny Gates Beckman. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Education at the Jewish Federation of Omaha. And tonight we have Hazzan Krausman, Cantor Alexander, and Rabbi Tenenbaum. Rabbi Tenenbaum is currently in invisible mode. He will turn on visible mode hopefully soon. So we'll start on this side.
Thank you, honey. This is my lovely wife, Laurel.
Do you want to, no, I'm good, thank you. But do you want to pull up a chair? Because it's about what you do at home.
It's a guest appearance.
Actually, that's why I'm here, is to make sure he says it right.
That's fantastic.
I'll talk about before I was married then. I really had no life before this.
Do you remember that far back?
Well, that's one of the questions. We're gonna go there. But I guess okay, so I gave you both warning that this was the topic tonight.
Yes, you did.
And 2 out of 3 of us were foolish enough to show up.
This is so true.
Where are we starting?
Well, to use Hazzan's famous line after about 5 minutes in, well, we've about covered it, let's go home.
Wow. So home practices. I just want to set the stage. Clearly, you're clergy. So if I say what do you do for Shabbos? What does that look like? As a clergy member, you might have one practice or role, but I'm curious, in the middle of the summer when it's not your Shabbos, I mean, for those of you who get to rotate, wait, no, none of you do. I'm so sorry. No, I'm joking.
So what happens in my house at Shabbos is my children have a lovely Shabbat meal without me.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, that's fun. But I mean, I think ideally,
I think I wanted, here's where I thought about starting. Could you share, for this opening question, just a day in the life of yourself observing Shabbat before you became a clergy person? What did that look like? And any segment of Shabbat, what you consider one of your personal practices, whether it was your home of origin, or whether it was your practice immediately before becoming a clergy person. Just, give us a snapshot. What does that look like?
Start?
sure, go for it.
So as far as I can remember, we always, when I lived at home with my parents back in the old country, Canada, we, Shabbat was always a special deal. Friday night, we always had a really nice dinner, and growing up, we kind of lived in a triplex. So we lived on the top floor, and my Aunt Min and Uncle Herschel and my cousins lived in the middle. And then they rented out the basement. But so between my Aunt Min and my mom, who were both serious cooks, my Aunt Min never cooked for less than 50 people, even though there were only 4 people in her family. So when you walked into the hallway of our building between my mom and Aunt Min, I mean, you knew Shabbos was coming because they were both cooking up a storm. We always had a big Shabbos dinner, sometimes together, sometimes not. Shabbos morning, we all went to shul. I don't remember a time in my life when we didn't all get up Shabbos morning and go to shul. And we all, the time I was like 15, I sang in the choir. So I don't know if I ever remember much of a life before like working in a synagogue, but we all went to shul together, and shul in those days started at 8:45 and ended at like 1:30. So we were there a good amount of time. And then we would come home and have Shabbos lunch and kind of do our own thing. But Friday night, we never went to shul Friday night. I don't know why, but we never did. But Shabbos morning, the whole crew went to shul. So the year that I didn't live at home before I went to the seminary, I lived with a friend. And so my friend and I, in Toronto, in those days, there are 5 or 6 or maybe more different places that you could buy kosher food, and about 3 or 4, or maybe more, European style kosher bakeries. So Friday, we would spend the day buying stuff at every one of those locations, eating half of it on the spot and taking the rest home for Shabbat. So we got to the point where we had to like pick and choose, because there are some bakeries that wouldn't sell me certain bakery items because they're afraid that I would like die in their store or something like that. It was a little bit larger in those days. So you don't need that brownie. What do you need it for? Don't buy that. So, but that's a memory I have from when I was not living at home. But even when I, lived for a year or so with a friend of mine, we, Shabbat was always, special. We always had Shabbat dinner. We almost I think we always went to shul. And so that was always, Shabbos growing up for me.
So I grew up in a Reform household, meaning that we emphasized Friday nights over Saturday mornings. So I also grew up, my mom would usually cook dinner. Sometimes my dad would just rush in from work. He's a surgeon, so rush in to have dinner. Sometimes maybe he'd not quite make it to dinner. We did usually go to Friday night services, which at that time were probably at like 8:00 at night, because that's when Reform services usually happened in those days. And I was, as a kid, we went to services almost every week. And I remember being allowed to like stay in services through some prayer. And then I was allowed to leave and go like hang out with the other kids in the library or something like that. And we would play tic-tac-toe or hangman or something on the library chalkboard. But it was part of, what we did every week. And I don't know that it was particularly normative from like, I didn't have a lot of friends that I saw at Friday night services on a regular basis, but it was something my parents were very interested in. My synagogue, we had Saturday school for 7th grade B'nai Mitzvah year. So we went to school with our parents, and the rabbi was our teacher Saturday mornings. And then all of us were expected, parents included, to go to Shabbat morning services. So we always had a minyan because all the 7th grade parents were at services. And like then only, whichever bat mitzvah was happening that week would be excused from class and show up to, take pictures and lead services and read Torah and stuff like that. So it's kind of like built in that you're going to show up for your friends because you're already there for class, etc. I also grew up going to Reform summer camp. I grew up at Asrui, so had a practice of Shabbat from that camp side of things. Different musical aesthetic in my home, but same kind of, candles, kiddush, get dressed up, have services that are different, or reading Saturday morning, things like that. When I went to college, I had been a leader in my youth group. My cantor had invited me to sing songs with the adult choir and to sing solos from the High Holiday Bima as a senior in high school. And I got to college and I kind of expected I will, be president of Hillel one day or something like that. And I showed up and to our first week Friday night services, and the Hillel at NYU at that time, they had Orthodox services and they had egalitarian services. So I knew which one I wanted to be at. What I didn't know that egalitarian was code for conservative. And I did not know the conservative service. I didn't know the music. I didn't know the prayer book. I didn't like the let's sing one part of the paragraph together. Let's read the rest of it silently. Let's sing the rest of it at the bottom. Like, it was very foreign. It felt very not like the Judaism that I was familiar with. And it did not come back right away. It took a while. It took some conversations with the rabbi who was the head of Hillel. And it took starting with a small group of friends similar to me who felt that neither of these worship spaces suited their needs. We started a reform minyan at Hillel at NYU. So I would say that what I remember most from that Hillel time period was that on Friday afternoons, I would be exhausted and like, oh, I don't want to go to Hillel. I have to walk 20 minutes across Manhattan to get there. And do I really want to do this? All my roommates and my friends are, they're starting their party evening, whatever they're doing. And I would go and I would lead services and I would be so glad that I went, and it just like washed all the garbage of the week away. And that's what kept me coming back, was that even when I didn't really want to be there in the first place, I still felt really good having done it by the time I was done with it. So, and then I basically went to cantorial school pretty much out of college. So there were weeks I did not work when we were in Jerusalem for school. I did not have a pulpit. We had all sorts of Shabbat rituals that we did as rabbi and cantor classmates. And then I started pulpit work, and there are Shabbats that I'm off vacation, and I tend to not go to synagogue when I'm off for vacation. I tend to have Shabbat with my children, with my family, make sure the kids actually get to light candles and sing Kiddush, which often happens when I'm not home, but not always.
Wonderful.
One of my other questions, and just to be clear, audience participation is acceptable. So if you have
Ask some questions.
questions,
Sure,
pop them in the chat or raise your hand. But
we'll make up in it.
I was going to, I definitely have some follow-up questions I wanted to make sure you guys touched upon. I was excited to ask, are there any practices that you grew up with that after transitioning to, finding your spouse and creating your own family, you shifted due to, a merging of two different family backgrounds? And is there like anything fun or interesting you can tell about that?
Well, not fun or interesting, but when I was real little, we lived in the same building as my Bubby and Zadie. And she had a custom of, during the month for Pesach, she would get on her hands and knees, scrub the floor in a particular room, and cover it with the Yiddish newspaper. So by the time Pesach came, you were kind of only allowed to walk into the rooms with no Yiddish papers, which was basically none of the rooms in the house. So that's a custom that I did not continue. It's hard to get a Yiddish newspaper. I tried, it wasn't the same as an English newspaper. But other than that, I think the customs that I developed since I was married are actually more fun and engaging than they were when I had growing up. When we had when I was young, we all got together for the Seder. All the men sat around the table, and one end, all the kids sat at the other end, and all the women went into the kitchen. Then they dealt out the Haggadahs, and my grandfather would go, and then when they would do that, they would say every single solitary word of the Haggadah, like, and then when we start going to Hebrew school, we would say, wait, we know how to sing this particular part. all right, go ahead. And then so that was our Seder growing up. The only thing that was the highlight, I guess, from a very young age, I learned how to ask my grandfather the 4 questions in Yiddish. And so that is something I'm trying to teach my kids. I don't know how well it's gone. They kind of get it, but I did do the 4 questions in Yiddish. So that was probably the only morsel from growing up that I kind of carried over. But when we started going to the seminary and through college, well, I mostly lived at home through college, but when I started with our own household, obviously our seders became more engaging, and there was room for talking and games and all kinds of stuff. So I would say that the fond memories I have are really not of growing up. They're more of since I met Laurel and became part of her family, and then we merged our families together because they were a lot more fun than we were.
Well, I think our Seder is more fun than the one I grew up with, but perhaps my children would disagree. Right? Like maybe it's only fun because I'm more into it. And when I was 10, I wasn't really that into it either. I don't know what they would say. But I would say the biggest thing, Jacob also grew up in a Reform household. He grew up in a small town in the South, and he's from Middle Tennessee, about an hour and a half west of Nashville. And they drove an hour and a half into Nashville to go to Temple for Sunday school and for holidays and things like that. And they had certain dietary rules as a Jewish family, but it was not kosher rules. But when you are in the South, everything is cooked with pork. So they did not eat anything that had pork in it, which was very limiting in a public school diet when the vegetables are cooked with pork and things like that. So that was, I think that was an important thing that they did and that marked them in a public and private way as a Jewish family, aside from not going to church, or the church that they went to was the Jewish one, as the question was often asked. But I grew up, my parents decided to start keeping kosher when I was about 8 years old. They took a class with the rabbi who said, just try things. And they decided to just try things. And they decided to start keeping kosher. And I remember like one weekend, we went through like the whole kitchen. We bought, a second set of everything from can openers to spoons and pots and a new set of dishes and all of these things. I just have this memory of like finding where everything fit in the drawers again. And it was very meaningful to watch my parents take on this thing and transition us from being a non-kosher household to a kosher household. And so I grew up keeping kosher. At some point in time, my parents kept kosher in the house, but we could still eat what we wanted in restaurants. And I, as a teenager, decided not to mix meat and dairy in restaurants, but still to eat meat that was from a kosher animal, but not kosher slaughtered, if that makes any sense to people who make all sorts of strange compromises. And so I had a very different idea of what a kosher household was than what Jacob had, which was also, I don't think he called it kosher, but a Jewish oriented diet, right? That he was making choices on what to put on the table and into his mouth because he was a Jew. And he agreed to keep kosher in our house. We have 2 sets of dishes. We buy only kosher meat for our home, but he has very strong opinions on Talmud versus Bible, and is like, there's nothing in the Bible about a cheeseburger, and you're just not going to convince me. So we don't have cheeseburgers in our house, but he does eat cheeseburgers out of the house. And like, these were compromises that we made. And I had to think about whether I cared for my children or didn't care, or what would that look like. And now we also eat a lot of plant-based meat because it doesn't taste as bad as it used to. And because now we don't have to worry about cheeseburgers. We have cheese incredible burgers.
Yeah.
So those are some of the compromises that we made along the way. And, I said, I grew up with a definition of Reform Judaism as learning as much as you could and then making choices about what you were going to do. And I felt like Jacob knew why he was making the choices he was making, and I knew why I was making the choices I was making. I respected that, and I thought that that would actually teach our children something about Judaism and theology and choice and independence that I approved as well. And then they're going to go make choices that I don't approve of, but I gave them that
No,
option.
your kids would never do that.
That's what you tell me.
Well, I always say that being a liberal Jew means being comfortable with your level of hypocrisy.
Amen.
Yeah, just finding a level of hypocrisy that you're okay with and then just sticking with that. So I guess that's kind of how it goes for whether you're conservative or reform or I guess any kind. I guess almost all Jews kind of have to do that at some point.
Fantastic. So thinking about children and actually, no, okay,
Good.
so I'm like,
I love my children, but we don't have to think about them for a while.
no, okay. No, I had a really fun other question. So part of this is like how your experiences as members of your own denomination, but then obviously in Omaha, you get a lot of opportunities to interact with other denominations. And I assume that previous to you living in Omaha, you've also had many interactions with other streams of Judaism. And I was curious, like, can you each think of one of the more interesting things? Like, did you ever have a moment where your head just kind of like went like, what? When you heard another Jewish person share a practice of theirs, and whether it was their stream of Judaism, conservative versus Orthodox or whatever, or whether maybe it was like Ashkenazi Jews versus Sephardi Jews. Can you ever recall learning a custom that was Jewish, but was yet at the same time very foreign to you?
Yes, but what was it? I don't remember.
Here, I'll start.
Okay.
I'll start.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I'll start. Okay, so I had just no concept of kitnio for Passover.
Okay.
And like I figured like the follow-up questions could, I also was curious about Passover, but both of you have mentioned those. Just navigating, I didn't realize there were such stark differences between how Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews observe Passover and how fluid so certain families become on Pesach. So when I moved to the East Coast and I had a wide variety of friends of different streams of Judaism and was experiencing Passover the first time there, my mind was blown by how many people would like basically say, I have one great grandparent who was from Iraq, and therefore I will eat corn and rice and it will be all good. And that is our house practice. And so I guess that just, in all honesty, like, a lot of friends that I grew up with, we just stopped eating bread, right? We stopped eating bread. We started eating matzah. We didn't worry about any other ingredients, actually. But I'm curious.
So, I think Passover is a really great example of where that comes, especially like in college at Hillel around, those kinds of meals would be where you like see the difference or talk about it the most. I definitely remember meeting a friend at, in the kosher cafeteria in college, who was, my mom is Ashkenaz and my dad is Sephardi. So even though mom's the one who cooks, she will cook the kitniot for my dad to eat, but she won't eat them herself, right? And it was like this weird, like patrilineal, matrilineal, where they're Jewish because matrilineal, but the traditions are because of the patrilineal lineage, right? Like all these things that came together. I also remember distinctly learning the difference, like at NYU at the time, the Chabad was inside of Hillel, but it wasn't a separate entity. And so all of these things were both Hillel and Chabad. So we had like everything going on at once. And the Chabad rabbi and Rebbitzin and their family were very, important in my, college experience, of my Shabbat experience, of the many kids running around the tables experience, all those things. And for Passover, we're eating in a kosher cafeteria. They have separate food from the food that we're eating. And with Passover, like all the things that I grew up with as normal Passover foods, I'm learning from the Rebbitzin, like, oh no, we don't make matzah balls because it puffs. We don't put even farfel in our soup because it puffs up. And it's like these things that are like so core Passover foods for me are not at all what my friends here are doing. And I don't know if that's universal or just their particular family, but that was for sure shocking. I had heard about Sephardic Jews eating rice and Ashkenazic Jews not eating rice. And I grew up not eating kitniot, and I now kind of don't feel such a strict need for it. I think that there's a lot between just don't eat bread and you have to make everything yourself, right? There's a lot in between that I'm very comfortable with, especially because I've had the lovely opportunity of having to be here in Omaha house hunting and learning my new job over Passover. So there were only certain things that I was able to do in terms of actually still being able to eat.
Yeah, so I was going to say gebrachs is my number one thing too. That's the rule where you can't have matzah come in contact with any liquid during Passover. So that's a very commonly practiced thing. And some people will change their tablecloth regularly throughout the Seder because matzah crumbs could easily come in contact with a drip of wine or something like that. And so that is called gebrachs. And that still makes me crazy, but I'm not crazy. I still don't get that, but that's pretty widely held thing. So I was going to say that too.
And that when you have that as a rule, can you use the matzah meal to cook things?
No, that's why you'll notice that everything you buy for Pesach that's prepared is made with potato starch. If you buy cookies or anything that's already prepared, it's always made with potato starch because potato starch is not a matzah product. So potato starch can come in contact with liquid without causing.
I'm learning something right here.
So all you gebrachs people out there, God bless you, because that is something I've never been able to wrap my head around. The only other instance, that's a thank you. I think we're together on the gebrachs thing. I think the only other time that there's been many times my mind was blown at the level of somebody's, I'm going to say observance in quotes. But we had a friend that was from Lakewood, New Jersey, which if you don't know Lakewood is just next to Warsaw in Poland, but it's actually New Jersey, but it's really in Poland. And so he was visiting and he would not go to the Chabad for services because their religious practices he couldn't accept. Because, for example, they
were not strict enough.
They were not, and they did heinous things like they did the Shema after the official time. There is a specific minute and second after which you're not allowed to do the Shema on a morning, depending on the number of daylight hours in the day. And Chabad had services later than that particular moment. And so he would not set foot in the Chabad for services because they were not Orthodox enough. So that kind of blew my mind.
Always nice when we keep dividing ourselves.
Yes. Well, I once worked with a rabbi who said that keeping kosher, but this is true for all things, is kind of like a gunfighter. Like you think that you're the coolest gunfighter in the West and you're the most. And then one day some gunfighter will come around and you'll find out that he was even better than you were. He said, keeping kosher is like that. He said, no matter how kosher you think you are, there's always going to be some dude come to town that's even more kosher than you are. And I think that phenomenon is where we got kitniot from, although I can't really prove that historically, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's why we have kitniot.
I always assumed that it was like Merat Ayin, right? Like the same as the progression from how chicken becomes fleishik, right? It's not a lactating animal. How does it become fleishik? Because it looks too much like raw veal or something like that, right? Like, so the same like with flour. Well, ground up lentils looks the same as ground up, wheat. So maybe you would accidentally or something like that.
That does stand up to a certain level, but why peanut oil was kosher for many, many years, and then one day it became kitniot.
I don't know.
So
I don't know why you can have kosher Passover baking powder either.
and none of it stands to reason. It's just a thing that we do because
Somebody else made
rabbis
the
said
rules.
to do.
Somebody else.
See, the
made
rabbis
rules.
on here, so we can all pick on the rabbis. It's the rabbis. They make up the rules and we are all stuck with them.
I did confirm that he is well and good.
Well, that's
But
good.
there was a scheduling mishap, so
Oh,
Okay.
he will remain invisible for the remainder of
that's
the
good because you
session.
got two cantors and no rabbis. We're gonna just blame everything on the rabbis.
That's
That's
a great idea.
just how we roll.
That's a great idea. So I don't see any questions from folks in the audience.
Carrie has.
Oh, Carrie has, the Lenos. Let's hold on. Does it, oh yeah.
Carrie, there you go.
Got it.
Couldn't find the cursor.
So my question is for Hazzan.
Uh-oh.
Didn't you question when all the women were in the kitchen?
Did I question why the women are in the kitchen? No, they were
Yes.
making dinner. Why would I question that? We had
They
great
never-
dinners.
They never participated in the Seder?
Well, they did in between stuff, like if the chicken was ready and the muscle balls were still cooking, they would come in for a bet.
Wow.
I assure you that when I was 8 years old, I'm shamefully gonna say that I was not an advocate for women's rights. So I will admit that freely at this point. When you grow up in a home, that's the way it is. So that's the way it is. I mean,
I just found that very shocking.
Because that wasn't your experience?
Well, remember, I didn't grow up Jewish.
Oh, well,
Ah.
sorry.
well, there you go.
Well,
So-
but has that, can
So
you,
I don't think that was a good thing. I'm just saying that's the way it was. So if you thought that I meant that was a good idea, I totally thank you for bringing that up because I absolutely do not endorse that in any little bit.
We
Our
just
family also
remarried.
later, we all work together, but that's the way it was back then.
Okay, well, we
Yeah.
just returned from a trip to Israel where we spent 10 days with our Orthodox family. So previously in another community they lived in, all the men and the women would be separated for everything. Now, my family decided not to do that. So therefore, when they have dinners, like we had Seder, we had Purim, everyone was together in their house. And this is what they've decided to do. And that's much more egalitarian, I think. And it's much more comfortable for us that this is the way that they decided to celebrate the different Seders, the Sudas, that they had. So we had a lovely time there and it worked out great for everyone. But I'm just making that statement because when I remember going to their other community, when everybody was separated, I found was very uncomfortable for me to think that the men were over here, they were doing all the religious things and the women were stuck with the kids in the other room. That was not good.
See, my mother was smart. She stuck the kids in with the men, so maybe they were.
I certainly don't recall it being like the women weren't at the table. We sat, often in my household, around a big long table or a big L and, families together. It wasn't like all the men at one end and all the kids at the other, but, for sure, grandma would get up and put the matzo balls in the water to boil them, and then she'd come back, and the men certainly were not helping with the cooking. And I would say that in my household, the benefit of like the modern house floor plan is that when I'm in the kitchen, I can still see the living room. I'm not behind a closed door. It's an open floor plan. So I can drop the matzo ball in and then like run back to the table to sing Kiddush. It's a lot more, friendly from that standpoint. But I think that it is very, very common. I participated in this musical production called The Stars Come Out. It's based on a book by Abigail Pogrebin. She interviewed all these famous Jews. And one of the stories in the musical is about the women in the kitchen and then turning it into like the first feminist seders that were only for women, where the women got to do the liturgy and write their own stories and, uplift Shifra and Pua and uplift Miriam's stories and add the Kos Miriam and the orange and all the things that get added in a feminized liturgy, grew out of this storyline that I think is actually Abigail's mother was part of this group of people, that grew out of this experience of Seder was for the men and the women were just in the kitchen. And it was a reclamation of women's space in the religious world. So while I think it's not that it was the women were not permitted to participate, it certainly was definitely normative for them to be the cooks while everything else was still happening.
Right, exactly. It wasn't like it was a religious thing. It was, and I don't think at any point did either my father or my grandfather, any of them said, okay, you guys stay in the kitchen, we're gonna have the Seder. It was just the way it was. The women cooked and the men did the thing. They were very happy. They were all together in the kitchen. They enjoyed being, they had, different generations all together in the kitchen, and they were, I'm not saying this is ideal, but I'm saying they didn't feel as though they were oppressed, I'm pretty sure.
They probably enjoyed sharing the recipes.
Yeah, and they talked about what they grew up doing for Pesach, and they talked about what horrible people their husbands were and all this stuff. And but in all seriousness, it was the food is a hugely important part of Judaism, not only because we like to eat, because our foods are how we learn. I learned more about Judaism from my mother's cooking than I did from going to Hebrew school, for sure. And every bit of Jewish cooking has something to it. I mean, the Pesach is a classic example, but even, my mother made blintzes on Shavuot because, we learned that you don't eat meat on Shavuot. And she made cabbage rolls for Simchas Torah because it reminds of the rolling of the Torah. So I learned everything from my mother in that kitchen. So I don't want to reduce the power of that. I'm not saying that I would advocate for that happening, but I'm saying that I don't want you to think it was a matter of the men knew how to do stuff, so they did it, and the women didn't know how to do anything, so they cooked. And it wasn't a matter of the men wanting to do it without the women. I think everyone was content at that time with the way they participated. And I'm not advocating for that any more than now, but I am saying that it wasn't a matter of oppression or exclusion. It was just a choice that everybody made.
And if you are making a choice to allow the traditions of the Jewish people, the commandments of God, the covenant, whatever the motivator factor is, if you're going to allow that to be part of everything that you put into your mouth, it has a huge impact on the other choices and your other ideas about God and ideas about Judaism and ideas about community. So yes, I agree with that. You may be happy to know that the new dining hall at Asrui serves only kosher meat. There is no non-kosher meat available. So Mazel tov. And at that time, there was kosher food available at the dining hall. I think you had to go to the window and get separate dishes or whatever. But it is. We Reform Jews have been on a big roller coaster with food, right? Like there was a whole movement 100 years ago to say kosher is antiquated and unscientific, and we should serve shrimp at our, at our big celebration to the whole Jewish community. Like that was a part of Reform history that, my relatives are part of that tradition. Both of my grandparents grew up in traditional households. I've heard stories from my mom that, they kept kosher at home, but for business purposes, they would eat non-kosher food when they were at a business meeting out in the city. And I think there's some story that like my great grandmother served, I don't know, shrimp or something. And her son, the snot nose, my grandfather said, "Mom, that's not kosher." And she said, "Well, what do you know? Whoever knew what a shrimp was?" She's an immigrant from Romania. She didn't, I guess, know what a shrimp was from whatever she grew up with. And he being a snot-nosed teenager, opened up the Torah and showed her in the Bible where it said that this was a non-kosher animal. And what do they know? And she had to serve it. So, that was a woman who kept kosher. She kept kosher the way that they had back in the old country. But when there was food that she didn't know from the old country, she didn't go ask the rabbi. She did whatever she thought she should do. So, my family, if you look over 4 generations, was kosher, was not kosher, was not kosher, was back to kosher, was a different kind of kosher. So we kind of were on the same kind of spectrum or pendulum or whatever, roller coaster as the movement itself.
I think everyone has a really good selective kashrut story,
Mhm.
right? It's like I had a colleague who would not ever eat a cheeseburger, but it was acceptable to have a hamburger and a milkshake because they were not together.
There you
They
go.
were not together.
Yeah.
Another colleague who, because it was Passover, ordered a salad with shrimp. Because if she would get the breaded item, that would not be kosher for Passover.
I know people who will have a BLT on matzah. Like, I don't quite get that, but I also, like, if you're gonna eat the bacon, why not on Passover? I don't know.
Right, yeah. If your thing on Passover is just, saying, okay, it's a festival of unleavened bread, I'm gonna eat unleavened bread, then yeah, why not? I mean,
And frankly, if you do nothing for your diet, Jewish in your dietary practice, the other 350 whatever days of the year, why are you going to then dive deep into Passover? And now maybe I personally think there is benefit. I think that Passover is one of my favorite holidays. Having grown up keeping kosher in a school that had school during Passover, which you guys all know about, but back in New Jersey, they didn't know about having school during Passover. I went to school with a box lunch with matzah and with charoset and with gefilte fish, and people looked at me like, what is that weird stuff? Or they would taste the matzah. Oh, this is so delicious. And I'm like, what kind of crazy person are you? But my mom always gave me like special treats. I got these like chocolate lollipops in my lunch that week. So like I loved Passover because I got to be a little bit special, a little bit different. And mom gave me special chocolate lollipops for Passover.
there you go.
There is something that you learn by doing it and that gives you, so even if you have no interest in Jewish food the rest of the year, try it.
Right, and it's also, anything you do has merit in the fact that you did it. So just because, all right, you ate bacon, but eating matzah is a different mitzvah. So anything you do is you get merit for doing it, and you get, the idea of observing the commandments is mostly to make us feel closer to God. So if that week you feel closer to God because you ate matzah, so eat matzah is better than eating it on toast.
Yeah.
For sure.
Hmm.
All right. Any other questions?
Okay.
Do you have questions? Are we finished?
Well,
Where do we go?
we have 9 minutes.
All right.
We can't, and super.
No.
No, there are questions.
Let's go.
I know, so Mark had an interesting question that I thought I would pass along,
Okay.
that when we were talking about this beforehand, I'm not sure, like, it doesn't necessarily have to do with differences between denominations, but I think it's an interesting question nonetheless, which is, how do you each keep your holidays interesting and meaningful, given they happen every year?
So we're different every year.
I know this, but it's just,
Are you talking about professionally or personally?
personally.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
well, I think it is, the reality is that, first of all, I gotta say that each holiday only comes around once a year. So while, I participated in Pesach 64 odd times, it still comes around only once a year. And every year we schlep the dishes up and we pull out grandma's bowl and the mysterious spoon made out of some moon alloy that came from somewhere that we don't understand, but everybody wants it.
It's in the wheel.
There's particular dishes that we only use for matzah farfel or whatever. Every time we do that, it's an amazing thing. It's like getting a present and opening that present. And even though we know what's in the box, as long as God forbid it didn't break, in and of itself, it's a beautiful thing. And every year is Sukkot when we schlep out all the different bowls and we put it all together and we swear this time we're only going to put up half of the sukkah. Why do we need such a big sukkah? And why maybe we should find a way to not put it out all the way down. Maybe we could put it on the deck so we don't have to schlep. But we always make the whole sukkah and we always have 1 million people in our sukkah. And we always schlep everything up and down the stairs to eat in the sukkah. And it's a beautiful thing. And all the holidays have their own innate inner beauty. And the fact that they come, it's just like a really dear friend that you only get to see once a year. Even though, the older friends are almost more cherished than new friends. And so for me, we'll take the high holidays off the table because I'm sure I can speak for Cantor because it's hard for us to experience to tease the joy out of the terror. But leaving that, there's still something beautiful about the high holidays, in that if you get through Yom Kippur, you get rewarded with Sukkot. So so I there is that. When our kids were younger, we found cool ways to make Pesach more interesting. We made a tent. I actually learned this from Laurel's parents who did that. We made a tent in the living room and we had the Seder in the tent. We still never, ever have the Seder around the table that we're going to eat. We always have the beginning of the Seder somewhere else, either outside or in the living room, in the basement, because people are sitting on a table where there's food to be, where there's table settings. It's a Pavlovian thing. They want to eat. They see a table, they see a fork, they want to eat. So we always have the beginning of the Seder somewhere else. And then when we lived in Florida, we did crazy things like we would put a doll in a basket and float it across our pool. We would have piles and piles of Legos in the middle of the room so our children could build pyramids out of Legos during the course of the Seder. We played games where we gave everybody a card with one of the items in the order of the Seder, and when your card came up, you got to come and stick it up on the board. So we, when the kids are little, I think we had more fun with it. But now I think it's just the joy of being together and experiencing it and going through stuff. And even if it's the same, especially with things like, well, with all the holidays, you can always find new meaning in it, even though you've done it for so many years.
So interesting. I go back to the food. Like, I'm always I think about do I want to make the same meal that we had last Seder and the Seder before, or last Rosh Hashanah and the Rosh Hashanah before that? But I do. I wind up making it because it's so good and because I don't ever make it other times. There is no reason, there is no ingredient, there is no anything that says I could not make a carrot kugel during the rest of the year. But you know what? That carrot kugel only gets made for Seder. There's no reason that we couldn't make an apple cake or even a round challah, like other than Rosh Hashanah, but like they just don't get made the other times of the year. So there's just things that go with those and that keep it lovely and delicious. I think I'm not as creative. I kind of said, well, children, you'll just have to learn it and suffer through it like I did. I like the idea of sitting in a different place though. That's
It's always a good idea. And then you get liberated to the table.
Liberated to the table. That's an interesting concept. We went to Seder in Jerusalem when I was a student, and the classmate who hosted us, they served crudita after you dip the parsley.
Oh, we
And
do
I was
that.
like,
We don't stop eating. Once you start eating an
That
item at the
is
Seder, you
amazing.
never stop. So right, once you
No,
get to a
that was
vegetable.
super liberating to
Right.
me.
Oh yeah, and we also know that potato chips are also a green vegetable.
Awesome.
So we also, after we go through the parsley and the potato, I don't know if you're a parsley or a potato person.
We're parsley people.
Parsley.
What's a potato? I don't get
Well,
that.
in Poland, where my dad is from, parsley was not an item that humans ate. Anything green
What
was
you-
fodder for cows.
Okay.
They would not, my dad still called salad grass. Dude, he ate it all the time. He called salad gruis, which is the Yiddish word for grass. So it was unconscionable to those people that they would eat. I don't know if they even had parsley in Poland. But so their green vegetable was potatoes. So we always have boiled
Are
potatoes.
potatoes green?
They're a vegetable. If they grow, I think at some point they're green. I never grown potatoes,
I've
but
never seen a green potato.
yeah, I have, but I don't think I would want to eat it. But
Yeah, the green ones are usually the ones you don't want.
right, but it's a vegetable. Potatoes are a vegetable, and they grow in the ground, and they have way more flavor, and it's more fun to eat a whole pile of boiled potatoes than eat a whole handful of parsley.
It is, it's true.
But we are an egalitarian Seder, so we serve both parsley and potatoes.
One year, when I was new to the Seder making life, I wound up buying cilantro instead of parsley, and I'm a person who does not like cilantro at all. So that was a big mistake.
Oh,
So you
Don't
were
get
really,
the cilantro instead of the
you
parsley.
really felt the
I
oppression
did
that our
really feel
ancestors
the
felt.
oppression instead of the sadness. Yes. But my children actually like the parsley, which I did not like parsley when I was their age. So that's pretty impressive.
See, when we were kids in Hebrew school, we would plant parsley in a little cup.
Tu B'Shvat?
On
Yeah,
Tu
we
B'Shvat.
planted on Tu
Right,
Right, and then
B'Shvat.
you would take it home, and
And
then
they-
we get like 1 inch of
It's
parsley, and
not
then your mother would.
it's not really enough parsley
Right.
in that amount of time.
I didn't understand it because we never ate parsley, but now it took me many years to get it.
This is amazing.
So it stays new because we just decide that it's better to do it. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I was pointing because Anita said that the lollipops used to be whole circles and now they're only a half size. And I totally remember that being true. They're also just milk chocolate, which is a sad cousin to chocolate. So I don't like them as much anymore.
There you go.
Wow. Well, I mean, we've reached our time limit very quickly. And that's always a good sign. It means a good conversation. So thank you both.
Thank you,
Thank
Hazzan.
you, Cantor. It's
Benny.
always a joy to be with Cantor Alexander. And once again, it was very nice of you to have every single Cantor in Nebraska at the table here.
No, you didn't have to share us with anybody.
I
That's
like to
right.
be inclusive here.
Very important to do that.
I do need to plug a couple programs because this is a busy week. Tomorrow we are having our spring author event. It's not a luncheon as normal, but it is post-lunch and we're having the author Allison Hammer. You can still join us and it's going to be 1 p.m. at the J. And then also next Tuesday, the JFO is partnering with the Schwab Center to have a Persian dinner and lecture on the Iranian Jews in the diaspora. We have a visiting scholar.
I'm
And-
signed up for that.
Can I see that one? I don't know.
That sounds
Absolutely.
fantastic, yeah.
You should come here.
You got it in the mail.
It should have come in the mail. Yeah. Maybe you don't get the mail. It's okay. Not everyone does.
Well, my husband picks it up, so things go into the garbage before I get home.
Recycling, it's all
Don't
about
tell.
recycling.
All right, and then
You can come down from the recording. please.
I know. And then wait, I got ahead of
You saved it all
myself.
in a special folder.
I got ahead of myself. So the Iranian Jews, that's in the evening on Tuesday, and then in the morning on Tuesday, via Zoom only, 10 a.m. Annetta from the Jewish Press and myself are interviewing Jan Schneider-Lund, who authored a novel. And it's part of our local author series we're doing every other month. So that's 10 a.m. on Zoom. And all of these things can be found at jewishomaha.org if you don't have all the details. So, go there, see all the things.
Or
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody have a-
Thanks.
good night, thanks.
Thank you.